Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. It was a typical day. At least, I thought it was. The kind of day that just blends into the background of life. Nothing too remarkable about it. I'd just finished a long day at work, the usual grind of numbers and reports. The kind of work that numbs your mind after a while. When I got home, the apartment felt the same as always, empty, quiet, and for some reason I liked it that way. The stillness, the silence, it wrapped around me like a blanket, a comforting cocoon where I could just disappear from everything. I walked into the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee, the light from the setting sun spilling in through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across the floor. The apartment was bathed in a golden glow, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But then, something caught my eye. I froze for just a second, standing still in the doorway to the kitchen. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It was small, barely noticeable, but I couldn't ignore it. My shadow. It was wrong. It wasn't just the way the light bent around the room. No, there was something more. As I stood there, I could feel it. My shadow was lagging behind me. I wasn't moving, not yet, but I could see it on the floor, stretching out across the room just a moment too slow. A second, maybe two, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. My breath caught in my chest. What the hell? I shook my head, trying to brush it off. Must just be the light, I muttered under my breath, laughing at myself, as though trying to convince myself that it was nothing. A trick of the eyes. Something silly. But that sinking feeling, it wasn't going away. I made myself a cup of coffee, trying to get rid of the creeping sensation that something was off. But every time I moved, I could see it. My shadow, just a beat behind. It wasn't a trick anymore. No, this was real. Later that evening, as the room darkened and the shadows grew longer, I noticed it again. This time, it wasn't just the delay. It was something else. My shadow wasn't just trailing behind me, it was waiting. I got up from the couch, the creak of my legs against the fabric of the seat breaking the silence. I turned toward the kitchen, but my shadow, it stayed where it was, stretched across the floor, growing in length and just hanging there. It wasn't following me. It wasn't mimicking my movements anymore. It just sat there, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned quickly, looking down at the floor where the shadow lay. It was wrong. It didn't behave like a shadow should. I moved again, this time with more intention. I watched it. This time, it was ahead of me. I hadn't moved fast enough. How could it be ahead? How could it have moved before me? I swallowed hard. I was sweating now, my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped forward again. And again, my shadow lagged behind. I could feel it, creeping at the edges of my vision, twisting in ways that made my breath catch. I turned my head quickly to the mirror on the wall, hoping to shake the feeling of something stalking me. But when I looked into the glass, nothing was there. It was just my shadow. But it felt wrong, like it was pulling me into some dark corner where I didn't belong. Later that night, after a long, restless evening of trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, I settled onto the couch, still uneasy. The apartment was dim, the light from the street filtering through the blinds casting strange shapes on the walls. The silence in the room seemed thicker somehow, like it was pressing in on me. I couldn't relax. That feeling, that sense of something being just a little off, had taken root in me, and no matter how much I tried to shake it, it wouldn't go away. Then, just as I was about to close my eyes, it happened. I glanced at the floor, and for the briefest second, just a flicker of movement, I saw it. My shadow was waving. I couldn't believe it. Waving. Like it was greeting me, like it was aware. I shot up from the couch, my heart racing in my chest. This wasn't just some trick of the light anymore. This wasn't something I could brush off. I looked down at it again, my body frozen in terror. The shadow wasn't behind me anymore, it was beside me, stretching out along the floor with a movement so unnatural it made my stomach twist. I backed away slowly, but the shadow didn't follow my movements. It waited. And then, just as quickly, it shifted. I ran. I don't even remember what I was thinking, only that I needed to get away from it. I stumbled toward the hallway, my feet pounding against the floor, my breathing shallow and panicked. But no matter how fast I moved, my shadow stayed with me. In the corners of my eyes, I could see it, always moving in strange, unnatural ways. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, it was something else. I rushed into the bathroom and slammed the door shut behind me, breathing heavily, my hands shaking. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the thumping in my ears. I turned to face the mirror, desperate to see something familiar, something that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. But when I looked into the glass, my reflection wasn't there. There was nothing. No face, no body, just nothing, just a void. I felt my stomach drop, and in that moment I knew the truth. The shadow wasn't following me, it had already taken me, it had replaced me. It's strange, you know, how one little thing can shift your entire sense of reality. I never believed in the supernatural. Never thought much about shadows or things lurking at the edge of vision. But now I wish I had never let that thought slip through my mind. Because it all started so quietly, so innocently. I never could have known what was coming, not until it was too late. It wasn't a loud thing at first, more like a whisper, just enough to make you second-guess what you saw, but not enough to make you believe. I started noticing it on the second day, just a little delay. You know, when you move and your shadow follows, right? It wasn't following me the way it should. It lagged behind for a second, like it needed to catch up, like it didn't quite know what I was doing. I told myself I was imagining it. The light. Maybe it was the angle. Maybe I was just tired, a little out of sorts. But then it kept happening. Over and over. I woke up the next morning feeling unsettled, but I brushed it off. Same routine, same coffee. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something had changed. It wasn't just the way my shadow moved, it was waiting. That's the only way I can describe it. Waiting. It was like it was observing me, not just following, not just reflecting what I did. It seemed to hesitate before moving, watching me. So I decided to test it. I walked into the kitchen, normal as can be, but I didn't stop to look at it. I just moved. My hand reached for the coffee mug, and when I glanced back, the shadow didn't mimic me. It lagged. Just a little, like it was too slow to keep up. My heart skipped. I felt cold, even though the apartment was warm. I told myself it was nothing, just light playing tricks. But the next day it was worse. I was standing in front of the mirror, getting ready for work, adjusting my tie. The clock on the wall ticked with its usual rhythm, but something in the room felt off. I looked down. There it was again. My shadow was too slow. It lagged a little more this time, a little more than usual. I paused, looking at it, and my breath hitched. It wasn't just slow, it was stretching in ways I didn't remember. It was reaching out further than it should have, pulling at the edges of the room, as if trying to break free of the floor beneath me. I moved again. It moved, but a fraction of a second behind. And every time I looked, it was a little bit more wrong. That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I went for a walk, trying to clear my head. The streets were bustling with people, the usual city noise filling my ears. But even as I walked, I kept glancing down at my feet. And there it was again. The shadow. It wasn't just lagging now, it was ahead of me, as though it was expecting my every step before I made it. The way it twisted and stretched unnaturally as I walked. No longer just an echo of me, but something more. Something watching me, waiting for me to move so it could copy me. I froze in place, staring at it. The shadow stretched just a little too far in front of me. It flickered. It was there, but not there. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the thoughts, trying to ignore it. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee it. Every time I moved, my shadow was a step ahead. It wasn't following anymore. It was guiding. It was leading me, pulling me forward, even when I wasn't sure where I was going. The next few days were a blur. I spent them trying to ignore it, but the harder I tried to pretend it wasn't happening, the worse it got. My shadow didn't just lag anymore. It moved when I didn't. It twisted, contorted in ways it never had before. It was no longer just something that followed me, it was there, a separate entity. I began to feel its presence even when I wasn't looking at it. Always just there, watching, waiting. And then one night it finally hit me. I woke up in the dark, the room suffocatingly silent. The air felt colder than usual. I opened my eyes, groggy and disoriented. The faint light from the street filtered in through the blinds, just enough to see the shape in the corner of the room. It was my shadow. But it wasn't like before. This time, it was standing, watching me. I couldn't move. My heart thudded in my chest. My breath was shallow. For a second, I wondered if I was still dreaming. But no, the shape in the corner, it was waiting. I scrambled to my feet, my legs weak, and rushed to the mirror. I needed to see my reflection. I needed something familiar. But when I looked into the glass, I didn't see myself. There was nothing. Nothing but empty space. My reflection was gone. And that's when it hit me, the full, terrifying realization. My shadow wasn't just lagging anymore. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was becoming me. And I had become the shadow. There was no escape. There never had been. I should have known something was wrong long before it happened. But it didn't hit me all at once. It crept in. Slow, like a cold draft that you can feel but can't quite place. Everything started small, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. But as the days went on, it became harder to ignore, harder to convince myself that I was just imagining things. And now, looking back, I wish I had trusted my gut. It all began with my shadow. At first, it was just a flicker, something in the corner of my eye, too subtle to be real. I was in the kitchen, making myself a late-night coffee when I noticed it. My shadow. It wasn't moving in sync with me. It lagged behind just a fraction of a second too late. It wasn't much, but I felt it. And that small inconsistency, that tiny delay, it got under my skin. The next morning, I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. Maybe I was tired. But that night it happened again. And again. This time, it wasn't just a delay, it was waiting. It would pause like it was watching me, waiting for me to move first before it followed. It was subtle, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I couldn't stop looking at it. Every time I moved, my shadow wasn't just following me, it was doing its own thing. It was stretching farther, bending in ways that made no sense. It wasn't just the way the light hit it, it was something else, something alive. And then, it started to get worse. One night, after another long day at work, I returned home, hoping for a quiet evening. But nothing about that night was quiet. Not when I walked into the living room and saw my shadow ahead of me. It wasn't behind me, as shadows should be. It was in front, stretching along the floor, always one step ahead. It moved as though it knew where I was going before I did, like it was pulling me forward, leading me. My stomach dropped. My heart raced. I stopped in the middle of the room, staring at it, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. I tried to move again, but the shadow didn't follow. It waited. And then, as I stepped forward, it moved again. Just a moment before I did. I took another step, my breath shallow, eyes fixed on the floor. But no matter how fast I walked, it stayed ahead of me, anticipating my every move, never once out of sync, always a beat ahead. My shadow, my own shadow, wasn't following me anymore. It was leading me, controlling the path I took, pulling me forward like a puppet on invisible strings. I should have turned and run, but I didn't. I couldn't. I found myself moving toward the hallway, compelled by something I couldn't explain. My body seemed to be moving without my permission. I glanced at the wall to my right and saw it again. The shadow wasn't just stretching in front of me. It was waiting. It was like it had become a separate entity, no longer just a reflection of me, but something other. It had an intelligence to it. It was aware, and I wasn't controlling it anymore. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears as I stumbled toward the bedroom, desperate to escape it. But even as I turned to leave the hallway, I felt it moving with me, not following, pushing me, like it was in control. And then it waved. I froze. My whole body went rigid as I stared at it, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. It wasn't like the gentle flick of a hand. No, it was more deliberate, mocking even. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had shape, it had purpose. And in that moment I realized it was aware of me. I backed away, my legs shaking. I tried to run, but it didn't matter. No matter where I went, no matter how fast I moved, it was always there, just ahead of me, leading me. It wasn't just moving with me anymore, it was moving for me. It was becoming me. I rushed to the bathroom, hoping the mirror would give me some kind of reassurance, something familiar to ground me. I flipped on the light and looked into the mirror. But when I saw my reflection, it was gone. Gone. I stared at the empty glass, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. There was nothing there, no face, no body, just a void, an empty space where I should have been. And that's when it hit me. My shadow wasn't just my shadow anymore. It had taken me. I backed away from the mirror, my legs weak beneath me, my mind reeling. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand it. How had it happened? How had it taken me? I was standing in the middle of the room, my heart racing, my thoughts spinning. And then, just like that, the shadow reached out, its edges curling and twisting, like it had a life of its own. It was no longer my reflection. It was me. And I was the shadow. I had become the very thing I'd feared. The dark, empty presence that followed, that watched, that waited. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was me, and I was nothing. And as I stood there, a hollow imitation of the person I had been, I realized there was no escape. It wasn't just watching me now, it had taken me, and there was no going back. I don't know when it all started. Maybe it was the first time I noticed the strange delay in my shadow's movements. Or Perhaps it was when I realized that I could no longer escape it, no matter how fast I ran or where I turned. But that night, it became undeniable. The shadow was no longer just a reflection of me. It had become me. And I was losing the battle. The apartment was quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The distant rush of traffic outside muffled by the walls. I should have felt comforted by the silence. I wanted to, but I couldn't. The air in the room was thick with something dark and suffocating. Something that clung to the walls, to the floor, to me. I stood in the living room, staring at the floor. I don't even remember why I was there. Maybe I was waiting for the moment to pass, hoping it would all just be some twisted dream that would fade by morning. But it didn't fade. No, it only grew stronger. I watched it again, my shadow, stretching out ahead of me. It wasn't lagging behind anymore. It wasn't waiting, like it had before. No, this time it was alive, and it was leading me. I felt a chill run through me, the hair on the back of my neck standing up as I took a step forward. And then I saw it. The shadow didn't just follow me this time, it waved. A slow, deliberate wave. It wasn't like a friendly greeting or a casual movement. It was a command, like it was beckoning me, urging me forward, pulling me closer. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the dark shape on the floor, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. But there was no explanation. There was no reason for it. Just the unmistakable reality of it. The shadow didn't care about the rules anymore. It didn't follow me. It didn't mimic me. It was in control now, and I was powerless to stop it. I took a step back, but the shadow didn't retreat. It stayed there, stretching across the room, waiting. It was no longer just the absence of light. It had substance. It had will. And then it waved again, slow, intentional, like it was saying something, like it was telling me to come closer. I felt my body move before I could stop it. My legs shook, my chest tight with fear, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like the shadow had a grip on me, like it was pulling me toward it, forcing me to obey. I turned, my breath quickening as I stumbled toward the bathroom, my mind screaming at me to run. But when I looked down, I saw it again. The shadow was ahead of me, stretching across the hallway, leading me. Always ahead, always in control. I felt a sickening sense of vertigo, like the floor beneath me was no longer solid. I couldn't escape. I couldn't move. And then, something inside me snapped. I bolted for the mirror, desperate to see my reflection, desperate to find some piece of myself that hadn't been consumed by the darkness. But when I looked into the glass, there was nothing. No face, no body, just emptiness. A void. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back. I should have screamed, I should have run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the sight of what I had become. The shadow wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It had replaced me. It wasn't just ahead of me anymore. It was me. It had taken me. And I was the shadow now. As I stood there, trembling, I realized the truth. The shadow wasn't just waiting for me. It had been waiting for me. It had been waiting for the moment when I would be consumed, when I would become nothing but a fleeting memory in its place. It was no longer just an absence. It was a presence. And I was the one who had been swallowed whole by it. The wave wasn't a friendly gesture. It wasn't an invitation. No, it was a signal, a command, a promise. It was waiting for the next one to take my place. I thought I could outrun it, I really did, but I was wrong. It started small, like a whisper in the corner of my mind, something I could easily dismiss. A shadow lagging behind me. A delay I chalked up to tiredness or the odd angle of the light. But soon, it wasn't so easy to ignore. It didn't just stay behind, it waited. It moved on its own. And no matter how many times I told myself it was nothing, deep down, I knew. It was more than that. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes to the feeling of eyes on me. But it wasn't just the darkness that surrounded me. No, it was something else. Something watching from just behind me. Every time I'd glance in the mirror, my reflection wasn't quite right. It was off, distorted. And the shadow? Always there, lurking just a little too long, always a little too slow to move with me. But that wasn't the worst part. It was growing. I didn't know how to explain it, but I could feel it. The space around me was changing. My apartment had always been my safe place, my sanctuary. But now, every corner felt too dark, too tight. The walls seemed to close in, the air thicker with every step I took. And the shadow, it was everywhere. It wasn't just waiting for me anymore. It had a life of its own, a presence that wasn't mine. One night, as I moved through my living room, something shifted in the room. I stopped, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I looked down instinctively, and there it was. The shadow. But it wasn't just following me anymore, it was ahead of me. It was leading me. It stretched across the floor in front of me, like a dark invitation, beckoning me forward, pulling me into its embrace. My heart began to race. It wasn't just a trick of the light, it wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was real. The shadow, stretching out ahead, felt like it was alive, like it was feeding on my every movement, waiting for me to follow. I turned, trying to escape it, but no matter where I went, no matter how fast I moved, it followed. It was always ahead of me, stretching further, twisting with each step I took. It wasn't just there anymore, it was becoming a part of me. And in the silence of that moment I heard it. A wave. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it, the dark shape in front of me, watching me with intent. It wasn't like any wave I'd ever seen. It was slow, deliberate, and full of something I couldn't comprehend, something cold and empty, like it was beckoning me closer. I backed away, shaking, but the room was closing in. The walls felt like they were pressing on me. The shadow wasn't just a part of the floor anymore. It had expanded. It had grown. And it wasn't just following me, it wasn't just mimicking my every movement. It was controlling me. I tried to turn to leave, to get out of the room, but my feet felt stuck. The air around me was thickening, like the space itself was becoming heavier, suffocating me. I looked into the mirror on the wall, desperate for some trace of myself. But when I saw my reflection, when I saw what I had become, I felt the world crumble beneath me. There was nothing, no face, no body, just emptiness. The shadow had swallowed me whole. And in that moment I realized the truth. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't a reflection. It was taking me, slowly, piece by piece. I had become a part of it, and now it was taking over every inch of my life, of my being. The shadow had power. It was growing stronger, wrapping around me like a vice, consuming me until there was nothing left of who I was. I could feel it, wrapping around my chest, choking the air out of my lungs, suffocating me with its cold grip. And worse yet, I knew it wasn't done. It was no longer just something I could fight against. The shadow had taken my body, and now it was after my soul. It wasn't just following anymore, it was becoming me, and I was slipping away. I don't know when it began, when the shadow stopped being just a part of me, something that followed my every move. But I know when I first felt it, when I realized that I wasn't in control anymore. The room had felt cold. Too cold for an evening that should have been warm. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound in the otherwise silent apartment. and I had come to recognize that silence, that stillness. It should have comforted me, but now it pressed down on me, suffocating. I tried to ignore it, to go about my evening like I always had, but something felt different. The air seemed thick, charged, like something was waiting to snap. I stood in the center of the living room, my feet frozen to the floor, my eyes drawn to the place where my shadow should have been. But it wasn't where it should have been. It had already stretched, twisted, expanding across the floor, its shape warping into something far too large. Something that shouldn't have existed. I took a step. The shadow didn't follow. It didn't just lag behind, as it had done before. No, now it was ahead of me. It reached across the room, long and black like a tendril, as though it was pulling the very air around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body moved against my will, my feet drawn toward it, inch by inch. The shadow wasn't following. It was leading me. But then, just as I stopped, staring at it, trying to understand what was happening, it moved. Not in a way I had ever seen. It stretched unnaturally, like it was becoming something more, something that wasn't just the absence of light. The room around me felt wrong. It was like the walls were bending, as though the space itself was being warped, pulled inward by something I couldn't see. I looked around, desperate for something, anything, to make sense of what was happening, but the shadow was all I could see now. It wasn't just a reflection anymore, it was alive, and I wasn't the one in control. The silence in the room deepened. I could feel it. The presence of something else, something dark, something that had been waiting. The air turned cold, almost suffocating, and that's when I saw it. The shadow moved, not like before. Not like it was simply following me. No, this time it reached out. It curled upward from the floor, forming shapes that shouldn't have been possible, twisting into something that had no form, no shape. The edges of it flickered, like a flame that wouldn't burn, like a thing that existed outside the rules of light and shadow. And then, as if to confirm every twisted, terrifying thought in my mind, the shape in front of me shifted. It began to take form, slowly at first, like the shadow was absorbing the space around it, the walls bending to accommodate it. The space itself seemed to collapse. And there, in the middle of the room, the shadow stretched out until it formed something that wasn't just darkness. It was something else. A face. It wasn't a human face, not in any way I recognized. The features were there, but they weren't right. The eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were empty. Black voids that pulled in everything around them, swallowing the light, swallowing me. The mouth was wide, too wide, jagged and uneven, like something had ripped it open, something that didn't belong in the world I knew. It was a grin, but not a smile, not even a snarl. It was something worse. It was a twisted expression of something ancient, something that wasn't bound by the same laws I had been. And then it spoke. The voice wasn't a sound I could hear with my ears. It was a feeling, a deep, guttural vibration that seemed to come from within me, rattling the bones in my body. It was like I could feel the words in my chest, in my head, as if they were carving themselves into my very soul. "You think you can escape, Mark," the voice said, cold and slow, like it was savoring each syllable. "But you never could. You never could escape me." I tried to move, to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. My limbs were frozen, my mind a whirlpool of fear and confusion, spinning out of control. The shadow, the entity. It wasn't just a thing that followed me anymore. It wasn't my shadow. It had become something far worse, something far more dangerous. It continued, its voice seeping into me, wrapping around my thoughts, filling every corner of my mind. You think you've been living your life, Mark. But I've been here all along. You've been running from me, hiding, but you can't escape what you are. You were always meant to become me. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight it, but my voice wouldn't come. I felt a cold pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing the air out of me, slowly and deliberately. The shadow, no longer just a thing, was now a force, pulling at me, bending me, absorbing me into its endless void. I looked down at my hands, my skin, my fingers. They were fading. I could feel them, but they were becoming less real, less alive. The shadow, that thing that had once been a part of me, was now swallowing me whole. It was taking everything, my identity, my life. Everything I had been was slipping away, consumed by the darkness that had become a part of me. "You're mine now," the entity whispered, the words seeping into my soul. "And you will never escape, not now, not ever." I wanted to move, to break free, but it was too late. The darkness was already inside me, and I was becoming part of it. The room, the walls, the air, they all disappeared, swallowed by the shadow, until there was nothing left. Just the emptiness. Just the void. And I realized, in that final moment, the terrifying truth. I wasn't just part of the shadow anymore. I had become it. And the entity, it was me. And I would never, ever escape. I didn't want to admit it. I fought it with every part of me, desperately clinging to what I thought was left of who I was. But deep down, I knew. The shadow had already won. It had taken everything, every piece of me, and I was slipping through its fingers, becoming something else entirely. Something worse. The room felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. The silence should have been comforting, but it was anything but. It was suffocating. Every corner seemed to grow darker, the walls pulling in on me like I was trapped in some kind of sick, unending nightmare. I could feel it, that thing, that presence, crawling under my skin. And then I felt it again. The shadow. It wasn't just a reflection of me anymore. It had stopped following my movements. It had started to control them. I could feel it now, pulling at me, stretching its dark fingers into my very being. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead, leading me, guiding my every step. Every movement felt like I wasn't in control. It was in charge. My heart raced, my breath shallow, as I stood frozen in the middle of the room. I couldn't look away from it. The darkness spread across the floor, swirling and shifting like liquid, moving in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. My body felt heavy, unresponsive, as I slowly realized something more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. The shadow was alive. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, it was a thing that wanted me, a thing that was taking me, a wave. It wasn't like any wave I'd ever seen before. There was nothing friendly about it. It wasn't a gesture of warmth or familiarity. No, it was a command, a beckoning, and as that dark shape twisted and reached toward me, I felt my body move in response. The pull was irresistible, a force far stronger than my own will. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet wouldn't move, my body wouldn't obey. I could feel the darkness closing in, inch by inch, like it was trying to swallow me whole. "Mark." The voice, deep and familiar, echoed in my mind. But it wasn't my voice. It was the shadow's voice, and it was in my head, swirling with the darkness, consuming every thought, every shred of resistance. "Mark, you're mine now." I felt the walls closing in around me. The floor beneath me felt like it was pulling me down, the shadow curling around my feet, rising up, wrapping around me like a tight, suffocating coil. And then as if to confirm what I feared most, the reflection in the window shifted. It wasn't my face that stared back at me. It was the shadow. The thing that had been stalking me, that had been behind me, around me, was now right in front of me. It had become me. It was me. And I realized, too late, that I had been slowly slipping away, fading into the very thing I had been trying to escape. "You never belonged to this world, Mark," the entity's voice rumbled again. "You were always meant to be nothing but a shadow. You were never more than that, and now I am you." I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, but my body wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't even feel it. The walls had closed in, the room had become suffocating, and the shadow, the entity. It wasn't just surrounding me anymore, it had become me. It had taken my body, my soul, until there was nothing left, nothing but darkness. "You are nothing," the voice whispered, so close now I could feel it vibrating through my bones. "And you will never leave. You are me. You have always been me. And I am all that's left." The last vestiges of who I was, the last spark of resistance, flickered and died. And in that moment I was consumed. The shadow was no longer just a reflection. It wasn't a thing that followed me, that waited. It had become my existence. It had swallowed me whole. There was no escape. There was no fighting it anymore. The shadow had taken me. And now I was nothing but a part of it. A part of the dark, endless void that consumed everything in its path. And I would never escape. I had become the shadow. And the shadow had become me. I can't tell you exactly when it all ended. I don't remember the moment when I became aware that there was nothing left of me. No Mark Lewis, no man who once lived in that quiet apartment. What I do remember is the suffocating stillness, the oppressive weight of the dark air around me, and the way the shadow stretched endlessly before me, like it was waiting for me to understand something. But I already did. I knew what was happening. I knew the truth. It had been a slow burn. At first, just a lag in the way the shadow moved, a flicker of hesitation here and there. Then it became deliberate, and soon I couldn't ignore it. The shadow wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was leading me, pulling me, until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. And then, slowly, quietly, I became aware that the world around me was growing darker, more suffocating, more isolating. It wasn't just the room or the apartment. It was the entire space around me, twisting, warping, like reality itself had begun to unravel. And as the walls bent, so did I. It wasn't a fight anymore. There was no longer any resistance, no struggle to reclaim what was mine. The shadow had grown too powerful. It had wrapped itself around me, pulled at the deepest parts of me, and slowly, methodically consumed them all. I could feel it now. Every inch of my being, every thread of who I once was slipping into that void. The weight of it was unbearable. The shadow, the entity, wasn't just a part of me anymore. It had replaced me, piece by piece. My thoughts, my memories, they were no longer my own. It was all tangled up in the dark, in that empty void where nothing real could exist. The last thread of who I had been was fraying, becoming something else. I stood there, my feet planted to the floor, unable to move. And then I heard it, the voice. But it wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't even my own voice anymore. "You've been running from me, Mark," it whispered like a sigh in the darkness. But the words didn't comfort me. They didn't sound like a reassurance. They were a revelation, a cold, unforgiving truth that had settled deep inside me. You were always meant to become me. You were always meant to be mine. I should have screamed, should have tried to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. The shadow had already consumed too much. My mind was no longer my own. I felt it then, something icy wrapping around my chest, something cold pulling tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. The walls of the apartment seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my own heartbeat, but it wasn't my heart anymore. It felt like it was alive. The shadow was alive. I turned toward the mirror, what was once my reflection, but it wasn't me anymore. I stared at the glass, at the dark shape that was twisting there. It had my face, yes, but it wasn't mine, not anymore. It was a mockery of who I had been, a thing that had hollowed me out. There was no depth in the eyes that stared back at me, just emptiness. Nothing. It had taken everything. The room around me had become oppressive, collapsing inward, the air thick and suffocating. I felt like I was being smothered by it. The shadow had consumed everything, the walls, the light, the air. It had taken over every inch of space, and I was its prisoner. There was no escape. "Welcome home, Mark," the entity's voice echoed in my mind, as the shadow spread across the room like an endless ocean, swallowing everything in its path. "You are me now. You are nothing without me." I wanted to cry out, to beg for release, but there was no sound, no movement. Only the suffocating darkness closing in, drawing tighter around me until I could feel it inside me, filling my lungs, seeping into my blood. And then, with that final realization, I understood. The shadow had won. It had taken me, consumed me, and there was nothing left but this dark, twisted reflection. The emptiness that had swallowed my life, my identity, had become my entire existence. The darkness had no end, no beginning. It was the end of me, and the beginning of the shadow. The thing that had once lurked behind me was now all that was left. The shadow was everything. It was me. I was the shadow now, and there was no escaping it. The darkness had taken its victory. The entity had won. And there was no one left to remember who I had been. I had become the shadow, and the shadow would never leave. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.